Today, we're having a conversation with Dan Barry, a phenomenal cold outreach and newsletter ad sales specialist. Dan Barry sold millions of dollars in newsletter ads. He used to be the director of sales partnerships at the Daily Upside, a newsletter with over 1 million subscribers. Dan then moved and founded Revenues and Ad Sales as a Service.com, where he and his team help newsletters sell more sponsorships. Really pumped to have you here, Dan. Thanks for hopping on. How are you
Hello.
doing? How's your week started?
Week's been good. Evenings are drawing in far too early and it's getting cold. But yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Cool. So, Dan, what inspired you to start ad sales as a service?
Good question. I was working at the Daily Upside,
Mm.
which is a relatively large newsletter at the time. And this was probably 2022, maybe 2023. Loads of people, Beehive had launched maybe a year prior. And the amount of newsletters was kind of exploding at that point, turning into a hockey stick graph. And loads of people kept on reaching out to me as like a director of partnerships, existing newsletter, saying, "Hey, I have X thousand subscribers," all kind of like going after the morning brew business model and saying, "Hey, how do I sell ads? How do I make money with this list that I now have?" And I wanted to kind of like start my own business at some point. I was getting into my mid to late 20s and kind of saw an opportunity, a demand or a skill gap or a knowledge gap within a growing, very niche industry, which newsletters is. And yeah, left my job without a plan and with London Rent, which instills a lot of urgency in someone, and then figured out what people want. Figured out there's two things: either helping generate sponsorship leads, which is what we've been doing for the best part of a year, or covering the full sales cycle, which is TBD still at the moment, and then launched with. So that's what inspired me. How we actually launched, just been over the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, been posting on LinkedIn and Twitter, trying to build up a. It's never going to be a big audience with media sales, ad sales, or newsletter people, but a small yet super relevant audience. Built up a wait list just from posting organically, which was, I think, a very good way of selling first and then kind of figuring it out after you've got people with at least a few people with some verbal yeses and a proof of concept, proof of demand, and then launched right near the start of 2024.
Cool. How's your journey been so far since you started?
Good. Yeah, really positive. Who knew that owning a business was stressful? Don't know why I was surprised at that, but yeah, overall really good. Um, Making some key learnings, kind of like at the 6 month in mark, so like a number of months ago now. Everyone's still growing, partnering up with someone here in London to launch another service soon. So yeah, all good, but the whole YouTube dream of starting a business and then working from your laptop on a beach for 2 hours a day a month later is not real. Not that I expected it to be, but left the job to start my own business, and now I'm working more than I ever have. But it's all creating a thing that I own and control. So it's all super positive, but yeah, not without its change, which change is stressful to humans.
Right. Um, yeah, so there's probably going to be a lot of people that are just starting out with trying to sell ads to potential partners, companies. So I'm gonna be asking a lot of questions about, that would be
Please.
relevant to them, or maybe bigger companies as well that want to do it in-house. or hire agencies. So when you're just starting out, what number of subscribers do you think is good for newsletters or like newsletter operators, owners to start reaching out to potential partners trying to sell ads?
Yeah. To start, if you're monetizing with ads, direct sold sponsorships, you can start too early. And there's not an objective number of subscribers, which I think makes sense to start outbound. But you've got to really bear in mind that outbound sales or any type of sales isn't a set it and forget it revenue stream. It is pretty, it's a slog, it's hard work. So you got to bear in mind with your current audience what the deal sizes are going to be, because what you don't want to do is invest a load of time and or money for generating leads and closing deals, and each deal will be worth a few $100 or whatever an amount is that just isn't worth your time. So figure out what deal sizes you need for a minimum for it to make sense, and then get there. Whether that's going to be different for everyone. If it's a side hustle, maybe it's a lot lower. If it's part of a larger business or your primary thing, it's going to be a lot higher, because again, sales is time consuming.
Yeah.
So yeah, when to start? If you're monetizing with other things, info products, courses, etc., you can't really start monetizing too early, because generally they are more set it and forget it, and a few customers on an info product or even a service or an agency is really impactful. So I mean, I would generally encourage people not to start selling ads on a broad newsletter until 50 to 100k subscribers. If you're super niche and you can charge 50, 100, $200 CPMs, then you can start earlier, and life will be easier if you're very niche to generally start conversations and close deals. So yeah, lots of caveats, but ultimately just pay attention to how much a deal is worth before you start, and then that will kind of tell you.
Cool. How would you recommend, let's say, beginners that they've reached that 50k, they have a broad newsletter, or maybe it's a niche B2B newsletter, they've reached 5, 10k subs. How would you recommend them to start finding new newsletter at partnerships? Would they do cold email? Would they go on LinkedIn? What would be the best path?
Sure. First of all, make sure you're capturing any inbound demand for ads. It's always going to be the easiest, the cheapest, and the easiest to close as well. So make sure you have the obvious: advertise with us, sponsor us, promote it a little bit if you can on socials.
Would you put it like in a newsletter at the footer or somewhere on the website as well?
Make it discoverable. Some people, I think, are afraid that if their readers see it, it will make them feel cheap or dirty. Fair enough. If you plaster it absolutely everywhere, then yeah. But I would definitely make it discoverable, maybe towards the top of the newsletter or in where the ad slots would go a few times. Don't do that all the time, but to capture people's attention. But yeah, definitely have it on the website, either at the top or the bottom, and at the bottom of the newsletter for sure. Also, if you have links in your socials, maybe you can at a certain point start linking out to the sponsor pages instead of just straight to whatever page you had in there previously. So first of all, yeah, inbound is a no-brainer, because it's just easier to close and low hanging fruit. In terms of starting outbound, again, assuming that you're at the level that you need to be, if you have, which quite a few people do, if you have a large following on a social platform, no matter what platform it is, I'm not familiar with TikTok, but just start there. Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, whatever. If you have brand authority and a big following, start there, because it'll be warm outreach. It won't be cold. Then my favorite way to reach out past that, in terms of stepping into more of a building a proper sales team and scalable systems, is cold email. It's the most scalable. It's annoying and frustrating at times with certain updates, but it's super measurable, and it does work if you do it well. But yeah, socials where you have a following. Other than that, email. If you want to kind of, again, go for the low hanging fruits, you could use services like MegaHit, which enriches your subscriber data, and then you can then search for marketers at relevant companies there. Which, if you have the budget and or time to do that, that again is reaching out warm instead of cold. And goes without saying, the warmer the lead is before you start the conversation, the easier the sale is going to be, the more likely they're going to convert, the higher the deal sizes are going to be, and life is just easier with warmer leads for sure.
Yeah. So if they subscribe to your newsletter, you have a niche newsletter, it's a very high chance that potentially your potential partners will be already subscribed to your newsletter. They might not just be reaching out to you. So you can use, different services that you mentioned, MegaHit, to enrich the audience and then reach out to them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're in a B2B newsletter, or even AI, a lot of your target sponsors, if you're an AI newsletter, are going to be at AI SaaS companies, or probably AI SaaS companies. And if you have a list of 40K, there's going to be inevitably an amount of people at relevant SaaS companies, ideally in the right marketing position. But you could broaden the job title targeting at this point, because if someone knows and likes you and or your content or your business, they're going to do you a favor and introduce you to the right colleague, much more likely than cold anyway. So yes.
So make sure they like you.
Yeah. Like you can assume that they like you, or if it's a personal newsletter, you is what I meant by that. Sorry. But if it's just not a like human first content creator audience, then if they're subscribed, and then you can hopefully assume that they like your content.
Well, yeah, you can do polls at the bottom of the newsletter. Do you like me? Just to
Yeah,
assess how
if you wanted to get really targeted at it, you could start segmenting your poll responses, and then go after those people that are in.
Yeah.
That never actually done that before, but that would maybe not be the most scalable thing in the world, or produce like the highest number of leads, relevant clicks, or hitting the I love you newsletter. But yeah, that's a good idea.
What are some of the what niches, what newsletter industries, niches, what kind of newsletters tend to perform best, when it comes to getting sales sponsorships? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you.
Good question. So this has been quite a good learning curve for us, in terms of working with a ton of different newsletters in different weird and wonderful niches. What we've learned, and again, with our limited but kind of pretty good at this point data, is that niche is power, and the more niche a newsletter is, usually the better the reply rates on our end, which is kind of like our North Star metric for sending leads. And then kind of like the higher the conversion rates are. If you have a super niche newsletter in the agriculture technology space, not only if it's a high quality audience, is that a very high quality audience for the right advertiser, but how many publications are there in the agriculture technology space? Not that many. Or if you have an audience which on the other end of the spectrum is a quality audience, maybe similar to Morning Brew, tech professionals, broad professionals, but not necessarily fitting into a niche B2B or B2C, there are unfortunately just a lot of those types of audience these days. and it's just harder to differentiate unless you have a unique USP, which again would kind of be your niche, or if you have scale. Yeah,
Niches in the
broader
riches.
audiences are sorry.
Niches in the riches, or riches in
Ni-
the riches in the niches.
Niches in the riches. We say niche, niches in the riches. Doesn't quite work, but yeah, it's true. Cheesy but true.
Cool. So, okay, so the more niche, the better it is, and does it? And so that definitely applies for B2B. But let's say it's like more of a, have you worked with consumer newsletters? I mean, there's also like niches as well. Like if you have a health newsletter, there could be like a lot of sub niches of health, and that would be
Yeah,
easier to.
to jump on that, health, whilst it's not exactly a super rare thing to talk about, especially maybe on the social media side of things, that's been a really, really high performing niche for us. Completely consumer. So I think in general, if I were going to start and invest time and money into starting a newsletter tomorrow, I'd probably make it B2B because of the CPMs and just the opportunities that arise by having a B2B audience. But a health newsletter has been really nice for us, generating leads, and by all accounts, I understand is also pretty nice for closing deals. And ultimately, answer your question, yeah, niches in the riches in the
Riches and
niches
niches.
applies to consumer and B2B. Yeah.
Got it. What are some of the niches where, well, I guess, yeah. What are some of the niches that it would be really challenging to get sponsors, even if it's a niche down kind of, industry or newsletter?
The most saturated is, I did a poll on this on LinkedIn, to get 1 million responses, but 50 or 100. Unsurprisingly, I think is AI, but still a good market to be in because there's just so many ad dollars and startups and so much funding, and people need to grow. if you have $12 million of VC funding and not very that much revenue, which a lot of AI startups do, you need to grow, and you need to spend. So I think sometimes political can be tough for obvious reasons of ad dollars wanting to not touch politics. I think if you can carve out a niche, I think kind of taking a step back from advertising dollars, I think there's a huge need for unbiased political media in general, and there's some great people doing some awesome things. But I think it's whether you're apolitical or kind of leaning one side or the other, I think that can put a lot of brands off. But at the same time, if you lean in to your angle, if you're more conservative leaning or more liberal leaning, there are a bunch of ad dollars that will help support your media endeavors from that side of the aisle, and kind of products and services which align with conservative or liberal leaning people. So nothing is not worth doing that it's so hard, but I would say broad tech audiences or potentially maybe political audiences would be harder to monetize, but not impossible.
Would you say for smaller newsletters, let's say if it's a B2B, it's like 10K subs, maybe to see 50K subs, just ballpark. But what kind of angle, what's the main, or I guess what brands would you suggest them reaching out for, smaller or bigger? And also what would you, I imagine what those brands want is different. So maybe bigger brands want awareness and smaller brands want performance. Like, can you kind of speak about that? Which size of brands would it make sense to reach out to? And what would you try to like sell as the ultimate benefit or the ultimate outcome from advertising in your newsletter?
Yeah, smaller companies are going to be much easier to get a foot in the door. So if you're small, let's say stick to smaller companies, and people set the bar at different levels, but I typically just divide it at 500. So under 500, we call small or SME, and 500 plus is enterprise. You can divide it into three, maybe set the bar at 100 or 200.
500 employees?
Yes, sorry, headcount
Okay.
employee. You can set the bar. You can do it in revenue as well, but I prefer headcount because there's more data on that for searching, filtering, and targeting. But you could also set it at 100 or 200 for startups, then up to 500 or 1,000 for SME, and then above for enterprise, or you could even go higher than that. But yes, start with smaller companies. They're more open to cold outreach. They're more nimble, especially if they're not just a small company, but a startup. They're looking to grow more. In enterprise, corporate cultures, risk taking and spending budget on an untested channel that you met on LinkedIn or a cold email is an alien concept to a lot of 40-year-old awesome companies, but old enterprises. Whether it's a SaaS with 80 employees that are already doing all the new age media things, that's another day in the office for them. So yeah, focus on smaller companies. They will be, or most likely will be, much more performance focused. Newsletters for most marketers do kind of sit on the fence between being a brand and a performance channel. Most will expect some kind of performance, whilst long term tapping into brand awareness budgets, especially for larger newsletters, is a great goal and lovely place to be in for reporting and getting renewals. It's not going to be the easiest. It's not going to. It's tough to get into those large brand awareness budgets via large enterprises or agencies. So you to have the relationships already, or have a lot of scale, or the right backing, and have a really good strategy to knock on those doors. So most of your campaigns are going to be fairly performance focused. But there's always caveats with everything. It's not a blanket rule. If you're super small, I have a small newsletter which is about newsletter ad sales or ad sales in general. I've not really pursued sponsorships for that because it's too small for the deal size to be worth my time. But the few I have done, it's not necessarily been about performance because it's a few $100s and that doesn't matter. So there's caveats to everything, but generally smaller companies easier to close deals with, more performance focused. Larger companies, much harder to get a foot in the door. Once you've got a foot in the door, that's the hardest bit. And obviously they have bigger budgets and are generally less concerned about getting XYZ CAC if they're Nike, for example, or whatever the situation is.
Yeah, so it's easier to get through to smaller companies, and they all want to see some sort of performance. It might be more expensive, but yeah, if you have a niche niche newsletter, you might still get some awareness, and it might be expensive per lead, but quality could be higher. So that makes sense. And would you say most of the smaller companies, like up to 200 employees, you'd reach out to CEO, founder, CEO, I guess, or VP of growth, or head of growth? Who would you?
Yeah, the smaller companies, obviously marketing, media buying, brand partnerships, influencer marketing, growth marketing, they're like your ideal job titles. At startups, obviously you might have one VP of marketing doing everything, or maybe one or two layers of marketing. The CEO might still be doing the CMO's job, especially once you get into kind of like sub 50 headcount. So yeah, within sub 100 employees, you've got a lot more leeway. Reach out to the founder or CEO. It can work, if anything, more effectively than reaching out to the marketing manager. Once you start getting to a few hundred employees or more, There's obviously more structure. Reaching out to the CEO of a company of 5,000 plus employees is not going to be most likely not going to be worth your time. You're better off going kind of like mid-senior. I'd never go entry level or manager. I'd always go and try and go for mid-senior, like head or director. I wouldn't really go below that, even if they are large companies, because they're just going to have more swing and budget control. But yeah, it's a sliding scale. The bigger the company, generally, the lower you want to aim in terms of job title, but don't go lower than mid-senior.
Got it. So, in your experience, or from what you've seen, what are the biggest mistakes people make when starting to reach out to sponsors or starting to do cold outreach? Like maybe top 2, 3 mistakes.
Good question. Top one is the most egregious one, I'd say, right at the start, using the main domain for cold outreach. If you're running a newsletter called newsletter.com, do not do cold outreach. Do not do one single cold outreach email with newsletter.com. If you're sending manual emails or warm outreach, I could maybe forgive you, but any kind of organized cold or at scale warm outreach, any kind of structured outreach, just don't, because you will inevitably get even if you're doing it super manually, you send to the wrong person, you get your wires crossed when you're sending out loads of emails a day. You will inevitably hit some deliverability issues with those cold outbound mailboxes. Being an email newsletter business, if your main domain starts getting deliverability issues, it is a massive headache for you, even without the cold outreach element. So buy domains, Google domains ideally, or you can use something like MailForge, which will give you SMTP domains kind of at scale quite easily and cheaply. Buy at least a handful, depending how much scale you're doing. We usually buy 10 to 20 per client, per newsletter, for example, and use them. Yes, it's annoying to manage, but it's the hoops that you have to the hoops you have to jump through to do cold email these days. So that's the first one. Second mistake, I see long emails. Your cold emails should be concise, ruthlessly short, whilst conveying value and information and all the relevant things, and segmented and personalized if possible, but they should be concise. So if someone scans it, even with that thought in the back of their brain saying, oh, another cold email, they can get the value straight away. Not, hey, how was your Tuesday? Isn't it a lovely time of year? No. I hope you're well can actually be fine, but really, really get to the point really, really quickly. Hope you're well is the maximum entry, or happy Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving week can be good, but get to the point quickly. Second, so that's the second. Third, maybe not as common, but knowing or thinking that you know that a certain type of advertisers will want and love your audience, and the ad campaigns will go really, really well. And just having an idea, if you're in niche X, that advertiser Y is a great fit, and not experimenting with other categories of advertisers or kind of going against the data. They're like, no, consulting companies would really need to get in front of our audience. It's like we have so many C-level executives, and pinning yourself down on a hunch or the love of, or not be a hunch, but like the understanding of your audience, and you know the value of them. So it's EA's advertisers must know it and they must love it. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes for a myriad of mysterious reasons, it's not. And you can waste a lot of time chasing a hunch instead of trying something, getting indicators for success or not, and adjusting
would you say it would make sense, like instead of relying on a hunch, um, just kind of looking at your competitors' newsletter or newsletters and similar, and see what advertisers advertise there consistently, and just reach out to them? Is it like would it be the best? I mean, you talked about that reaching out to people that already subscribe to your newsletter. But would it be kind of like the next step if you want to actually go out and find advertisers? Because they think the newsletters might be a right place, advertising your competitors. Why not try yours?
Yeah. So when I was talking about earlier was people in your subscriber base, definitely a
Mm,
warm outreach. Once you start getting into cold, or
mm,
lead heat is a spectrum, so to speak, the first place you should probably look is similar newsletters. Yes, um,
mhm,
especially if a brand is in a newsletter repeatedly or multiple similar newsletters. That's a very good indication that it works for the publisher and the advertiser. And if the advertiser has been advertising a similar newsletter and the campaign has been going well, they're much more likely going to reply for obvious reasons. If they've tried newsletter X, who's really similar to you, and it didn't go very well,
mm.
they are going to be less likely to reply. So, goes without saying, similar newsletters, great place to start. And the brands that are in there repeatedly or in multiple, they're much more likely to respond positively.
Mm. So when you're reaching out to brands by cold email at scale, how would you kind of structure your sequence? What would be the goal of the first email? How many follow-ups would you have? Yeah, that type of thing.
Yeah, so structure the cold email. Try and keep it visually appealing, gaps between the lines. I try and keep each line or paragraph no more than 2 lines. So it's
Hmm.
again, it's skimmable because people will be skimming it.
Yeah, we do the same thing with ad copy, like in ads, Facebook ads, or the videos, or if we put text in there or images, anywhere we put text, always 2 lines and then the break, because it's
Mm.
it's like very easy mentally to process it. So yeah, same applies to cold email.
Yes, skimmable or
Yeah.
scrollable. Same. And also digestible on a phone because depending on the industry, a large portion of emails are read on phones, which even if it's two on a laptop, 2 lines, that could be a lot of lines on a phone. So keep it concise. I try and keep it under 100, 150 words, kind of tops for a cold email. 4 seems to be the magic number in terms of touch points. So 4 emails in a sequence spaced out over 3 days. Could do a little bit less, could do a little bit more. From my experience, 4 email touch points has struck the balance of getting conversions, but not having law of diminishing returns and spam complaints and all that. But at least three. I've done 5, 6, 7. It has had diminishing returns. So yeah, I'd say 4 is the magic number. Um, there's a myriad of really good tools that are seemingly being built directly to combat or navigate through Google's new annoying rules about cold email. And Google will bring out an update, and then all these tools, Smart Lead instantly, Lemlist, not use Lemlist, but Smart Lead instantly, definitely, will then update the product in a way which navigates around Google's kind of hurdle they've just put out. So it's kind of funny tech cat and mouse game being played out at the moment. But yeah, there's a myriad of tools, and they instantly and Smart Lead, I'd say, for sending is probably the best too. But
Mhm.
there's loads of others.
Cool. Is there benefit of including any, case studies or metrics, or like saying, hey, we've achieved X, Y, and Z for this company in your cold email sequence, like maybe first email or second email, third email?
Yeah, key things to include are why you reached out, saw you in
Mhm.
X, or saw you sponsored X conference, whatever it is. Case studies, if you have them. If you don't, obviously you don't. Audience data. So who are your readers? Who are your case study? Who are your previous partners? If you're a podcast or a newsletter that has guests on it, which may be less applicable, then guests can, and you have some impressive guests, definitely showcase them and whack in your metrics, the obvious ones, open rate, subscribers. But yeah, try and keep it as simple might be the wrong word, but as clean as possible. I think a lot of people in cold emails try and get every single value point and data point and selling point into the first email. Or you could also apply this to the subsequent replies, but you're much better going to be much better off and much more successful just focusing on one or two value points. So like, why we reached out, we help HubSpot, Salesforce, whoever drive user acquisition through sponsorships with our audience of insert a quick summary and then a call to action. I like question-based call to actions, generally better at starting a conversation. Generally don't see that much uptake when putting a Calendly link in the first email. It just pisses people off and doesn't actually get that much results. I think it used to a few years ago, but as cold email has become more prevalent in everyone's inboxes, what works a year ago won't work next year or even next month.
Right.
So yeah.
Do you care a lot about just putting any links in the first email or having that, your picture or links to your like what's your what is it called, like the signature, right?
Yes.
The picture, the name, the position, the company name, maybe links to somewhere. Yeah, do you see that, having that or having links impact on deliverability, or how do you think about that?
Good question. So yes, links and images and anything really that is somewhat complicated or above just email, text will objectively harm deliverability. That being said, I always include an unsubscribe link in your email because you'd rather have people unsubscribe, and plus Google technically you have to in the footer of the signature. You'd rather people unsubscribe than block or report to spam for deliverability obvious reasons. With a signature, you can make a signature kind of look professional without images. That being said, we haven't really seen any significant negative impacts on deliverability with a small image. That small in terms of bits, bytes. So compress it and don't put it in there if it's going to be 17 megabytes. Try and get it as small as possible as a file size. And having a link in the footer to a website or linking out to, if you're also selling social campaigns, a social media page of sorts or some content, isn't going to completely tank your deliverability and will add value to the outreach. So keep as fewer links and images in there as possible. Don't attach anything. But if you want one link in there to send them to a relevant page, that will probably do more good than harm.
Cool. What does quick question as a subject line so is the best, or what kind of subject lines have you found work the best?
Good subject. For me, I like short, concise, clean, honest. And when I say honest, I mean talking about what you're talking about conceptually, without kind of being deceptive. So there's a few ways that I think a lot of people approach it that I personally don't like. It can work, but so there's the hook approach, which if you're reaching out to someone who's B2B, which everyone is if they're selling sponsorships, it's like engage with 400K X professionals now. That works as a hook in an ad, let's say.
Mhm.
I think it screams sales in my opinion. You can get good open rates with them. But yeah, it screams sales. It starts will inevitably start off the opening of that email with, here we go again. What I prefer to do is, let's say you're a finance or investing newsletter. Investing newsletter is the headline. It's honest. That is what it is. If they're an investing company, them receiving an email with investing newsletter is going to be pretty, like, what's the word? Non-suspicious. Not suspicious because of a scam, but it's not going to come across super salesy, or like high net worth individuals, or I think one of our best performing subject lines was crypto newsletter or crypto investors. It is what it is. It could be misconstrued as an internal email, but it's not being deceptive, like trying to come across as it's not deceptive, if that makes sense. So yeah, honest, concise, 2 or 3 words, and just you're describing what you're talking about.
Do you ever have you ever tested subject lines like just like test or test email or like subject line as a subject line or something like that? I guess there's for consumers it's a very different thing. Like I think at some point we've tested or I've tested some things like that, and this can work, or because yeah, I don't know why it just like very different, very strange. They think it's an error, and they're like, "Oh, how you messed up," and you didn't. You tricked them,
Yeah,
or
I've
like
never
something.
tested.
Your wife will
Sorry.
regret you, or something, something like you regret it. I don't know, something crazy like that.
It's worth experimenting with these things, especially if it's with a dispensable mailbox. I've never tested test or something similar to that. I know a few people are big fans of name dynamically inserted quick question. I
Yeah.
think that used to work really, really well, because it's personalized, but everyone knows that you can add in company name, industry name, job title into an email dynamically, and they know that isn't personalization anymore. Maybe it was
Yeah.
2 years ago. And now whenever I get, for me personally, whenever I get a Dan quick question or quick question about ad sales as a service, which is getting deleted, I'm not opening that email.
Wow.
Maybe that's colloquial, not data backed. But the way that I approach it, that we've gone through, generally has better open rates from our data. And then colloquially, I think it starts a better conversation.
Yeah. Right. Um. So you mentioned Smart Lead and Instantly as like 2 tools to send out emails. Are there any things you're using maybe to like build or clean lists, or what would you kind of recommend people, beginners, like scrape things manually or use tools?
Yeah, 2 of the most impactful sales tools, in my opinion, is Apollo. Just really good data, really nice, easy to use. If you're just starting out and just wanting to acquire email addresses of individuals and build prospect lists, those features are free or super cheap. And then if you want to start upgrading packages and paying more, they do have really deep functionality in terms of automations and workflows. They do have sequences and email sending capabilities. I have used them before, and I wasn't massively impressed, especially with the deliverability mechanisms. Smart Leader Instantly is much better there. Perhaps they've improved since then. So yeah, Apollo for data is probably the best. There are some other good ones out there, but Apollo, I would say, is the best. Clay is magic. There's no other way to put it. It is awesome. I think it's called Clay because you can kind of mold it to do anything you want. We use Clay for email personalization, validating email. Clay is basically if you haven't used it before, kind of a spreadsheet format with every data AI integration that you could ever imagine. And yeah, it is great for data, enriching contacts, company data, personalizing emails, and sending emails, but via smart leads. So we find a lot of our data in Apollo, personalize and do the research and qualify with a human, but also in Clay, and then send via smart lead. Fortunately, we're at a scale that we can obviously have, like we're doing things at scale, so we can justify maxing out all the tiers on these things. But if you're just starting out, Clay may not be that much of a value add. I'd encourage people, if they're just starting out, to
I think it's free. Like I'm looking at the website. It's up to 100 searches free, or you have 1.2K credits. So maybe like, just to test it out in the beginning.
Yeah, and it's also the efficiency gains from Clay, as of any efficiency gains, are much more impactful at scale. So I would, if anything, encourage people to actually start before they optimize and get some deals under their belts, figure out who the right advertisers are. If not, I wouldn't say starting with Clay is a bad thing, but assuming you don't have unlimited budget and time to learn a new tool, I'd get some ducks in a row before you move on to Clay, because it is hard to get your head around, and with any kind of scaled usage, can become quite expensive.
Got it. Do you track open or do you track, I guess, open rates or clicks when you're running campaigns, or because like there's a option to toggle it off, right?
Good question, and a hot topic. So this, I guess, at its core of this debate, some people are vehemently anti open rate tracking. Never track clicks in cold email. That will harm your deliverability. So will open rate tracking. The extent to which open rate tracking harms your deliverability, that is the bit which is up for debate. Some people will say never do it. Some people will say, like, we don't see any significant damage to open rates when we track it, but I'm aware that it does objectively negatively affect it. So how we approach this conundrum, and this conundrum as a result of Google's ever-changing black box of rules, is we do track open rates, but not all the time. That doesn't sound very specific, but let's say we're launching a campaign or a series of campaigns for a client with a series of mailboxes. We will track open rates initially, or at least in one of the free campaigns, to check that they're getting opened, and treat the open rate data as directionally useful, but not super accurate. And then to optimize the deliverability, we'll leave it off for the other two campaigns, or if it's just one campaign, turn it off fairly quickly, and only turn it back on periodically to get a good indication. And that being one factor which kind of we're taking into consideration, whether our emails are delivering. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dan. So What kind of open rates, when you're tracking those open rates, what are some of the ranges of open rates you're seeing roughly?
Massively ranges. If you have a really good list of valid email addresses, we use, I believe, not Find Email. I've forgotten the name of our email validation tool, but there are a lot of them which basically validates email addresses and prevents you from emailing invalid, old, dead, not used anymore mailboxes, which if you do that too much, it will hurt your deliverability as well. Apollo has a built-in feature which is not perfect, but good, if you want to keep things simple. So assuming you have a healthy list of email addresses which you're reaching out to, I'd say below 40% is probably a red flag. But there's always caveats. If you're reaching out to super large companies, especially old school industries like consulting, accounting, financial services, they're gonna just open your emails a lot less because they'll have very good cybersecurity blocking cold emails. So
a lot of it depends on the list and like
yeah,
reaching out, list quality.
if you're reaching out to large enterprises, I have like your open rates are going to be a lot lower. One example, I started reaching out to the large consulting firms for a newsletter. Open rates went from 60% to like 15. Deliverability hadn't changed, but just that's how dramatic the change is. They just weren't getting through their security layers. But yeah, I'd say below 40, if you're not going after those type of businesses, below 40 is a big red flag. We like them to be above 60. But if it starts dipping to below 40 or 50, again, with the caveat, there's so many caveats these days that open rates isn't that accurate. So again, I try and just take it with a pinch of salt, and directionally useful is my favorite phrase.
Have you tried lumpy mail or anything? I don't know, like sending a bottle of champagne, wine, anything like not an email, like very, because sometimes if it's a big lead, it's worth doing things like that. And
Yeah, for sure. I haven't done that in a while. We used to do it a little bit at an old company. But no, if you can do it in an economic way, yeah. I was speaking to someone today on the other side of this transaction. They're a brand wanting to get influencers to promote their product, but on principle, this I guess is transferable. And they would send product to the influencers to hopefully get an influencer campaign. And I think 40% of them converted from getting free stuff. And that's the brand paying them. So if you're gifting and asking for money, yes, it will build a better relationship and should have quite high conversion rates. But it's not going to be a silver bullet, magic bullet, whatever the phrase is. It's not going to be 50, 60, 80% conversion rates. It'll be nice, but I would hope higher than cold email, but it's not going to be,
harder to make it scalable, I guess. And
there's that as well. What is, I think, an extremely impactful, non-scalable way to meet sponsors is events and conferences. Obviously, the right ones. Brian, a good friend of mine who runs a sales at Payload, which is a space industry newsletter and media company. They're also launching other publications, I believe, in the nuclear space. So the space industry, obviously, very growing because of all the recent innovation, but also quite an old school handshakey business, as I understand. And a lot of their relationships and sponsorships have come from meeting people at events. You can apply that. It's not just old or clunky, handshaky industries. Go to events in any major city in the US, really. If you're in Europe, London, maybe Barcelona. There was one in Portugal, Lisbon, big tech event in Lisbon. But unfortunately, the US dominates for useful conferences. And go speak to the people at the booths, because they are paid tens of thousands of pounds or dollars to be there, and they're getting so little ROI or measurable ROI from that. So they would love to speak to you about your newsletter where you have measurable ROI, or at least impact, and probably a bigger audience if you have 5, 10, 20K subscribers than is at the event. Can't remember what your question was, but point still stands.
What's one thing, like maybe one single tactic or insight that you were maybe surprised of, or maybe something that really significantly impacted your cold email performance?
The most surprising thing, kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier, how different the response rates on our end and the leads generated were for the same, or not the same, but similar copy, especially conceptually, but for different topics and audiences. So similar what method of outreach could generate 45 leads for a health newsletter in his first month, but more like 10 for a different niche. So if I'm starting a newsletter business tomorrow, a business, not just a passion project, I'm really gonna start one that is in a niche which is easier to monetize with ads or whatever the message, the monetization approach is, because your life will just be a lot easier, happier, wealthier if sponsorships, all these
Chase you if they chase you.
And how little, maybe this isn't a surprise, but still worth mentioning, how little marketing newsletters struggle to find sponsors. Every marketing newsletter I know doesn't need our services because all their ICP for sponsorships are their readers, or at least a lot of them are. So starting a marketing newsletter is obviously a good idea. To a lesser degree, founders as well, founder CEO audiences, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so you're reaching out, it might be the same structure, the best method, but if you're reaching out to different audiences, the response might be very different. And I think it could depend on a lot of things. When, like, from my experience, it's definitely the saturation of how many people can find your email and how many people are pitching you. So that's it's a big thing.
For sure.
What would be one key piece of advice for somebody just starting out, securing sponsorships for their newsletter?
Asides the avoiding the problems that we mentioned earlier, don't use your main domain for cold outreach, but care about the campaigns. Actually, no, even before that, two things I'll talk about. Create, it's going to sound cheesy and obvious, but create really good content and build an engaged audience. All these small optimizations and higher reply rates, bigger deal sizes don't matter, or won't matter in the long term, if you don't have a really good product or content and audience. And depends on your perspective, they're all your product. So many, you can make some good money in the short term and inflate your list size and ego with subpar readers with subpar content, especially in like an AI boom or whatever. But in terms of a long-term business and happy clients and non-stressful life, not angry emails at 7 p.m. on a Friday, if you have a high performing audience and engaged readers and even closer to birth, good content, everything's going to be 10 times easier or even possible. If you have bad content, bad unengaged audience, it's going to be too hard or impossible to build a long-term business. And the second kind of extended from that is really care about the campaigns. Don't close a deal, get the copy the client submits, and then put it in a newsletter and hope it works. You need to, if you're doing direct sold sponsorships, which is what we're talking about here, if you're not personalizing the copy or doing something clever or creating lead magnets or trying the product and screenshotting you trying the product or giving a review or whatever it is in personalized to your content and audience, they may as well spend those dollars in an ad network and blast that same out other places. So personalize the ad, care about the campaign, and it will perform
Or
better.
deliver. Yeah.
Yeah, over deliver creatively and also objectively if you have the ad inventory, and just mention them a few more times, because then objectively and subjectively they'll want to repeat. Which the reason that is an important thing to mention, caring about the campaigns, because you'll get more renewals, and that's where the long-term relationships and larger deal sizes come from.
So let's say you've secured your first sponsorship, somebody paid you, they wanted to just do a trial. How would you convert them from just doing one-off ad placement to a long-term partner that would want to advertise, like they want to prepay you for a year, let's say?
Yeah, first of all, I would try and sell packages. Easier when you're smaller, because the amount of money you're asking for is not going to offend anyone. If you're asking for $2,000 as opposed to $800 for free placements as opposed to one, try and sell packages, space them out. Don't put them on consecutive days, space them out a little bit. That will increase the likelihood that the campaign will go well, and therefore they'll repeat. When someone is, the way I think about it, at least, when someone is an advertiser is considering renewing, there's two things they're going to be looking at: real value and kind of perceived value. Real value is the performance of the campaign, whether that's performance, lead gen, awareness. If it's awareness, it's opens, maybe clicks or page views, but it's an easier place to be for real value. That's, you can obviously, like I said, put your heart and soul into the campaign, report promptly and quickly and effectively and honestly. But it is ultimately out of your control, the performance of the campaign. But do everything you can do to make the campaign go well. And there's perceived value, and that is, do they like you? Do they think you cared? Were you creative? Did you over deliver? Did you have an anti-ad slot and you just we put you in here? And even if a campaign's gone okay, missed the CAC by a little bit, if you're super on it, honest, polite, maybe you've had a call, then the likelihood that they'll renew is significantly higher. So yeah, drive real and perceived value is what I'd say.
Cool. What do you disagree with most people about running cold email campaigns, doing sales for newsletters?
I would say a lot of people say it's not too early to start monetizing, but with sponsorships, I've worked with someone that started monetizing when an ad slot was $500 each, and hiring, albeit strategically, and everything going really, really well, closing the amount of deals that we should be, we're just breaking even. So if you have info products or you're launching a service, like I have a newsletter of 1,000 subscribers and have built a decent sized, small, of course, but a decent sized little business on the back of that. But if it's sponsorships, you can start too early. And again, how much money you need for a few hours a day invested in selling sponsorships, and it will be that if you're doing it at any kind of scale, is up to you. But I think we mentioned this right at the start of this conversation. Figure out what a deal is going to look like in money terms, and then if it's not worth it, just wait. You can start ad sales too early ultimately,
because like some brands are just like, oh, it's too small of a deal, or like a small.
It's some advertisers just won't be interested in such a small list. Some will. The super small companies, agencies, consultants, startups might be. But even if they are and you manage to close a deal and it's hours of your time and putting ads in front of your audience for the first time for a few $100s, is that worth it? It might be, especially if you love the brand and it's a passion project, go for it. If it's passion, never too early to start anything. Do it. But if you're trying to build a business, time is the most important thing to consider, if not the most important thing to consider. And therefore you can't start too early.
What's the highest ROI activity you've done in the last 12 months?
Content. Posting content on social media. For me, didn't have to think about that. For me, posting content on LinkedIn and to a slightly lesser degree, Twitter, and writing my newsletter has single-handedly, not single-handedly because it's all me and I have two hands, but has been super impactful in terms of growing my list and for me getting clients for a business. So yeah, and I was starting that before I left my job, just kind of aware that I should do it. And I could be a lot better at content writing and hooks and consistency. I'm not as consistent as I'd like to be. I miss some days, some weeks I only post once or twice, but yeah, just even if you're still at your job or you don't have a business to acquire clients for, posting useful stuff about your profession, job, industry is only going to be a good thing for whoever reads it, reaches out, and opportunities arise from it. And it's actually really nice to get all these thoughts, theories, and practices which are in your mind and you've been doing over the last months or years and write them out with this is how I do X, the 7 phases of Y. And it's like, oh yeah, that is what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And now it's on paper and got emojis in it and 7 people have liked it. I feel great.
Yeah.
So there's a personal, subjective,
and gets you clients.
And it gets you clients. If you do it right, and obviously set up everything else on the back of that needed. But most impactful thing I've done over the last couple of years is just write content on social /newsletter. So unsurprisingly, the most impactful thing I've done on a podcast about newsletters is write a newsletter.
Nice. What are your favorite books? Or maybe one, the most favorite.
I think I'm sticking with the impactful theme. I think the most impactful book I've read, I believe it was a Swedish writer. I'm not going to pronounce his name well, but it's Surrounded by Idiots. Kind of a misleading title. It's more about communicating with different personality types in a business setting. I think not just a business setting, but communicating with different personality types and understanding why people do what they do and how to engage with them in a sales perspective, but also just other getting along with people perspectives. And when I was reading that, I had a very overbearing boss at the time, and it helped me in the short term, helped me deal in inverted commas, deal with him, and also understand him and not be annoyed and know that his operating system is slightly different to mine. So yeah, surrounded by idiots, although it's not about idiots, it's about personality types.
Cool. Well, then where can people find you online? Like social media, newsletter?
Yes. Social media, LinkedIn, probably the one I'm on the most. Twitter, newsletter is www.revenues.co. Agency website is adsalesaservice.com. Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Cool. Yeah, we'll include all the links in the description. Well, really appreciate you joining today. This has been really a pleasure. So much value. I'm sure it's going to be benefiting everybody who's trying to secure any sponsorships for their newsletter. So thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody's listening today, thanks. If you don't want to miss future episodes, make sure you like and subscribe and share it with somebody who would find it valuable. Share it with a fellow newsletter operator, and make sure to check out the links in the description, check out the sponsors in the description, and see you next one.
Thanks so much for having me.